Begin every morning by remembering that before the noise of the world rises, before responsibilities pull at your heart, before worries begin to speak, God is already present. He is not waiting to be invited into your day. He is waiting for you to become aware of Him. As you open your eyes this morning, let your first breath be an acknowledgement that God has carried you through the night and granted you the gift of another day. This moment is not an accident. It is a divine appointment, a quiet invitation to start your day not in fear or hurry, but in His presence. Lord, as this day begins, we choose to turn our hearts toward You. We lay down the rush, the anxiety, and the distractions that try to claim our attention. We recognize that without You, our strength is limited, our wisdom incomplete, and our peace fragile. But with You, our steps are guided, our minds are renewed, and our hearts are anchored. Your presence in the morning sets the tone for everything that follows. When we begin with You, we walk differently, we speak differently, and we respond differently to the challenges we face. Acknowledging God before anything else means choosing awareness over autopilot and devotion over distraction. It is the conscious decision to let God be the first voice we listen to instead of the many voices that demand our attention. Before the phone is checked, before messages are read, before worries begin to line up in the mind, the heart turns toward God and recognizes that He is already present. This acknowledgement is not about saying perfect words, but about positioning the soul to recognize who truly holds authority over the day. It is an inner alignment that says this day does not begin with my strength, my plans, or my understanding, but with God's grace and sovereignty. When God is acknowledged first, perspective begins to shift. The problems that seemed overwhelming moments ago are placed in the hands of a God who is greater than every obstacle. Fear loses its intensity when the heart remembers who is in control. The morning becomes more than a routine. It becomes a sacred moment where trust is established before pressure arrives. Acknowledging God early reminds the heart that life is not random and that every moment unfolds under His watchful care. This awareness does not remove responsibility, but it reshapes how responsibility is carried. There is a spiritual posture formed when God is placed first. The mind becomes less reactive and more receptive. Instead of starting the day rushed and scattered, the soul becomes centered and still. This stillness is not empty. It is filled with assurance that God goes ahead of every step. In acknowledging Him, the heart silently declares dependence, understanding that human effort alone is not enough to sustain peace, wisdom, or endurance throughout the day. This dependence becomes a source of strength rather than weakness. Acknowledging God before anything else also establishes order within the heart. When God is first, everything else finds its proper place. Ambitions become healthier, desires become purer, and priorities become clearer. The heart no longer chases validation from people or success defined by the world, because it has already found acceptance and purpose in God's presence. This order brings freedom, allowing the soul to move through the day without the constant burden of comparison or performance. The act of acknowledging God in the morning creates a spiritual foundation that supports every decision made afterward. Words spoken throughout the day carry more grace because they flow from a heart that has already been softened by God's presence. Reactions become calmer because the spirit has been anchored in trust rather than urgency. Even when the day presents unexpected challenges, the inner posture remains steady because it was established before the storm arrived. There is also humility in acknowledging God first. It is an admission that life is not self-sustained and that every breath is a gift. This humility opens the heart to learn, to listen, and to be corrected when necessary. It removes the pressure of having to control every outcome and replaces it with confidence in God's guidance. This does not create passivity, but invites partnership, where effort is guided by faith rather than anxiety. Acknowledging God before anything else transforms the ordinary into something meaningful. Simple tasks become acts of worship when they are offered to God at the start of the day. Work becomes purposeful, conversations become intentional, and moments of waiting become opportunities for reflection rather than frustration. The presence of God we acknowledge in the morning continues to echo through every moment, shaping attitudes and responses in subtle but powerful ways. This acknowledgement also deepens spiritual sensitivity. When God is recognized first, the heart becomes more aware of His promptings throughout the day. Small nudges, gentle warnings, and quiet encouragements become easier to notice. The soul becomes attuned to God's voice because it began the day listening. This sensitivity leads to a life that is guided rather than forced, led rather than driven. Choosing to acknowledge God before anything else is ultimately a declaration of trust. It says that no matter what the day holds, God is enough. It affirms that His presence is more valuable than perfect circumstances, and that His guidance is more reliable than personal understanding. This choice may seem simple, but it carries the power to transform the entire day. From the inside out. Inviting God's presence to guide the day is an intentional act of opening every part of life to His leadership. It is the quiet but powerful decision to stop relying solely on personal understanding and instead welcome divine direction into every moment. This invitation is not limited to words spoken in prayer, but is expressed through a surrendered heart that says God is welcome in my thoughts, my choices, and my responses. When His presence is invited, the day is no longer navigated alone, but walked in partnership with the One who sees the beginning and the end. God's presence brings clarity where confusion tries to settle. As the day unfolds, situations arise that demand quick decisions, emotional responses, and moral discernment. Inviting God to guide the day allows His wisdom to shape these moments rather than impulse or pressure. The mind becomes steadier, less overwhelmed by options and expectations. Even when answers are not immediate, there is a quiet confidence that God is leading step by step, revealing what is needed at the right time. This guidance often comes through peace rather than urgency. God's presence does not rush the heart but anchors it. When decisions are made in His presence, they are less driven by fear of missing out or fear of failure. Instead, there is an inner assurance that obedience matters more than speed and faithfulness matters more than immediate results. This kind of guidance protects the heart from regret because choices are aligned with purpose rather than pressure. Inviting God's presence also transforms how challenges are faced. Difficult moments no longer feel like interruptions, but opportunities for trust. When frustration arises, God's presence reminds the heart to respond with patience. When disappointment appears, His presence offers comfort before bitterness can take root. Guidance from God does not always remove difficulty, but it provides strength to endure and wisdom to respond in ways that preserve peace and integrity. God's presence shapes relationships throughout the day. Words spoken under His guidance carry kindness instead of harshness. Listening becomes more attentive, and reactions become more compassionate. In moments of conflict, His presence creates space for understanding rather than defensiveness. This guidance leads to interactions that reflect grace, even in environments filled with tension or misunderstanding. Relationships become less about winning and more about honoring God through humility and love. There is also protection found in inviting God to guide the day. His presence guards the heart against distractions that pull focus away from what truly matters. It helps discern which opportunities align with His will and which ones simply drain energy without purpose. This protection extends to the inner life as well, shielding the mind from negative thought patterns that steal joy and confidence. With God's guidance, the heart learns to reject lies and embrace truth. Inviting God's presence encourages dependence rather than self-reliance. It reminds the heart that strength is not produced by striving, but received through trust. This dependence does not weaken effort, it strengthens it by aligning actions with divine support. Work done under God's guidance carries a different weight because it is fueled by grace rather than exhaustion. Even in busy schedules, there is an underlying calm that comes from knowing God is actively involved. This guidance also deepens awareness of God's activity throughout the day. Small moments begin to reveal His hand at work, a timely word, a delayed plan that prevents harm, an unexpected opportunity that brings growth. Recognizing these moments builds faith and reinforces trust in His leadership. The heart becomes more expectant, looking for God not only in quiet moments but in the rhythm of daily life. Inviting God's presence to guide the day is an ongoing posture, not a one-time request. It is a continual turning of the heart back to Him whenever distractions arise. Each pause becomes an opportunity to realign with His will. This posture creates a life that is responsive to God rather than reactive to circumstances. The day becomes a journey guided by divine wisdom, shaped by peace, and sustained by faith. Surrendering plans, worries, and decisions to God begins with the recognition that control is an illusion and trust is a choice. Many burdens carried through the day are not created by circumstances alone, but by the need to manage outcomes that were never meant to rest on human shoulders. Surrender is not giving up responsibility, but releasing the pressure to control what cannot be guaranteed. When the heart chooses to place plans into God's hands, it acknowledges that His wisdom exceeds personal understanding, and His timing surpasses human urgency. Plans often feel safe because they give structure and predictability, yet they can become sources of anxiety when they are held too tightly. Surrendering plans does not mean abandoning goals or ambition, but allowing God the freedom to redirect when necessary. It is the willingness to accept that detours may be part of divine guidance. When plans are surrendered, disappointment loses its power to define the day because trust has already been placed in a greater purpose beyond immediate outcomes. Worries thrive when the future feels uncertain, and surrender directly confronts this fear. Placing worries before God transforms them from heavy burdens into shared concerns. This act of surrender creates space for peace to enter where anxiety once dominated. Instead of repeatedly rehearsing fears, the mind learns to redirect those thoughts toward trust. Surrender does not deny the reality of challenges, but refuses to let them dominate the inner life. It shifts the focus from what might go wrong to who remains faithful regardless of circumstances. Decisions carry weight because they shape direction and consequence. Surrendering decisions to God involves seeking His wisdom before acting and trusting His guidance, even when clarity feels incomplete. This surrender teaches patience, allowing space for discernment rather than rushing out of fear or pressure. It also brings humility, acknowledging that personal perspective is limited and that God sees what remains hidden. Decisions made in surrender are less about personal gain and more about alignment with truth and purpose. There is freedom that emerges when surrender becomes a daily practice. The heart becomes lighter, no longer burdened by constant evaluation of success or failure. When outcomes are placed in God's hands, effort becomes sincere rather than strained. This freedom does not remove responsibility, but removes fear from responsibility. It allows the heart to remain open and flexible, willing to adapt as God leads rather than resist change. Surrendering worries also transforms emotional responses throughout the day. When stress arises, surrender invites the heart to pause instead of react. This pause creates room for prayer, reflection, and recalibration. Over time, surrender reshapes habits of thought, replacing cycles of anxiety with rhythms of trust. The mind becomes trained to release concerns quickly rather than carry them endlessly. This shift brings stability even when external circumstances remain uncertain. Trust deepens as surrender is practiced consistently. Each surrendered plan that results in unexpected provision reinforces confidence in God's faithfulness. Each released worry that is met with peace builds assurance that surrender is not loss but gain. The heart learns that God's involvement does not complicate life but clarifies it. This growing trust becomes a foundation that supports faith during seasons of waiting and uncertainty. Surrender also fosters spiritual growth by softening resistance to God's will. When control is released, the heart becomes more receptive to instruction and correction. This openness leads to transformation, as pride gives way to humility and fear gives way to faith. Surrender aligns the heart with God's character, shaping responses that reflect patience, gentleness, and perseverance. Choosing to surrender plans, worries, and decisions is ultimately choosing relationship over control. It is an act of worship that declares God as Lord not only in words, but in daily practice. This choice reshapes how the day is experienced, allowing peace to guide actions and trust to steady the heart. Through surrender, life becomes less about managing outcomes and more about walking faithfully in God's guidance. Walking in peace, gratitude, and faith throughout the day is the natural overflow of a heart that began the morning in God's presence. Peace becomes a posture rather than a reaction, grounded in the assurance that God remains in control, regardless of shifting circumstances. This peace does not depend on everything going smoothly, but rests on the confidence that nothing unfolds outside of God's awareness. As the day moves forward, peace acts as an anchor, keeping the heart steady when pressure tries to pull it into anxiety or frustration. Gratitude shapes how moments are interpreted. When the heart chooses thankfulness, even ordinary experiences take on deeper meaning. Gratitude redirects focus from what is lacking to what has already been given. This shift changes the emotional tone of the day, replacing complaint with appreciation. Small blessings begin to stand out: a kind word, a moment of rest, an answered prayer, a quiet strength to endure. Gratitude guards the heart against bitterness, reminding it that God's goodness is present even when circumstances feel imperfect. Faith provides the lens through which challenges are viewed. Instead of seeing obstacles as threats, faith recognizes them as opportunities to trust God more deeply. Walking in faith does not mean ignoring difficulty, but choosing belief over fear. Each step taken in faith affirms confidence in God's promises, even when outcomes remain unseen. This faith fuels perseverance, allowing the heart to continue moving forward without being paralyzed by uncertainty. Peace, gratitude, and faith work together to shape responses throughout the day. When tension arises, peace calms the inner voice. When disappointment appears, gratitude recalls past faithfulness. When fear whispers doubt, faith speaks truth. This harmony creates emotional and spiritual resilience, enabling the heart to remain balanced despite external pressures. The day becomes less reactive and more intentional, guided by trust rather than impulse. Walking in peace also influences interactions with others. A peaceful heart communicates patience and understanding. Words spoken carry gentleness rather than sharpness. Even in disagreement, peace allows respect to remain intact. This does not mean avoiding difficult conversations, but approaching them with a spirit that seeks resolution rather than victory. Peace creates an atmosphere where grace can flow freely, reflecting God's character through daily conduct. Gratitude deepens humility by recognizing that every good thing originates from God. This awareness reduces entitlement and increases contentment. Gratitude teaches the heart to celebrate progress without becoming prideful and to accept limitations without resentment. It fosters joy that is not dependent on achievement but rooted in appreciation for God's provision. This joy becomes a quiet strength that sustains the heart through long or demanding days. Faith sustains hope when circumstances test endurance. It reminds the heart that present struggles do not define the future. Faith looks beyond immediate discomfort and trusts that God is working behind the scenes. This hope keeps discouragement from taking control and enables continued obedience even when results are delayed. Faith anchors the heart in God's promises, providing reassurance that He remains faithful to complete what He has begun. Living this way requires continual awareness and intentional choice. Peace must be protected from distractions that invite worry. Gratitude must be practiced even when it feels inconvenient. Faith must be exercised daily through trust-filled decisions. These choices may seem small, but their cumulative effect transforms the rhythm of life. The day becomes less about surviving and more about living with purpose and confidence. Walking in peace, gratitude, and faith is not a denial of reality, but a declaration of trust. It acknowledges challenges while refusing to be defined by them. This way of living reflects a heart that relies on God's presence from morning to night. Through peace, the heart remains steady. Through gratitude, the spirit stays joyful. Through faith, the soul remains hopeful. Together, they shape a life that honors God in every moment as the day unfolds. Keep us aware of your presence. In moments of joy, remind us to praise you. In moments of difficulty, remind us to lean on you. In moments of waiting, remind us that you are still working. Let our lives be a reflection of a heart that began the day with God and continues to walk with Him until the day ends. We declare that this day is blessed, not because of what we will accomplish, but because of who walks with us. Begin every morning with God's presence, and let His peace, power, and purpose guide every step we take today. Amen.